I'm Rosie,
And I'm Jim.
and this is Cruising Sea Venture.
All right, thanks for watching Cruising Sea Venture. Now to follow up on our last video, in this one we're going to answer all those questions that have been posed on YouTube over the months that haven't been answered. So a couple things. We're just going to repeat the question and then we're going to give you an answer. We're going to limit the answer like to 20 seconds or something like that. Some of these questions are more complex than the 20-second answer lends to, but we'll do our best, and then maybe that will lead to some more Q&A that's more in-depth on some subjects down the road. So that is the plan. Let's see how it works. John asked, what kind of boat is it? Sea Venture is a 1977 Cheoy Lee long-range trawler. So they are cruiser. They built 12 or 13 of them. They were all custom built for the long-range stuff. And there is a boat tour one where we talk about, a video where we talk about that, and an engine room tour boat where we talk more about specifics of the boat.
Kameno Man said, great video. I'm a student at Skagit Valley College Marine Maintenance Program in Anacortes. The instructors of that program have a cruiser's college for non-students. I think he has guests talk about the cruising life. Would be great to meet you two sometimes. Yeah, we'd be happy to do things like that. We've actually shared at several yacht club events, and it's a great time, obviously, to talk about boating, which we love to talk about, and to meet other cruisers, and we're pretty open to do those kinds of things.
Runaway Heading asked, or said, you do a lot of slow cruising, and understandably so, but do you ever open her up? I'd worry about fouling up the plugs, etc. Great question. So we cruise at 1500 RPM on our twin Ford Lehman 120 horsepower engines. 2000 RPM is a standard top end long cruising range. Wide open throttle is 2500 RPM. We do open her up from time to time and she seems fine. You ask about fouling the plugs. She's diesel engine, so actually doesn't have spark plugs, but doesn't seem to be any issues with running continuously at 1500 RPM, which is at full operating temperature. How much drag do the paravanes cause on the vessel? I'm sure they would increase fuel consumption. Actually, not that simplistic of a question. In calm water, the paravanes reduce the speed by about 3/4 of a knot. In rough seas, where they're really functional and work great, I don't think it reduces our fuel consumption or increases our fuel consumption or decreases our speed at all, because the rolling, significant rolling above about 20 degrees reduces your speed. And I think that offsets by the paravanes leveling the boat.
Sharon commented that they recently found our YouTube channel and have been watching and had some questions about anchoring. They are East Coast cruisers. Also, she referred to themselves as shallow cruisers and wanted to know about anchoring in the Northwest. Well, we anchor in anything from 15 to 110, 120 feet of water, depending on the area. We also use a shore tie depending on how deep it is and how tight the anchorage is. So there are a lot of issues that go on in anchoring, and I think that could be a really good topic that we need to get into probably to share more of that information. But yes, we do have a full range of anchoring depths that we work with.
All right, so CKM asks, seems like installing a Keeper Gyro would be cheaper, like $40,000 to $70,000, and they work when stationary. All right, couple quick things. That's a Keeper Gyro. We actually did a lot of work into that. The correct Keeper, which is based on boat weight more than size, is the Keeper 16. The current price of that is $110,000, not including installation. Is 3 by 3 feet, weighs over 1 ton. There's nowhere in Sea Venture to put that. Also, cannot be boat owner operated, maintained, or fixed very well, and requires a generator be running 24/7 to keep it operating. So that makes the generator then critical for stabilization. So it didn't really fit. It's actually a lot more than you might think because of the size that would be required. I think with installation, more like 200,000, and the generator's a big problem with that as well. So that's how we ruled out Keepers.
Runway Heading asked, did you see any Bigfoots? Well, we have not seen any, but if you Google traffic cams Bigfoot, you might see something interesting. Have fun.
Hammer asks, just discovered your channel, great content. I understand why you decided not to run the wiring internal. I was wondering why you did not have wiring channels fabricated. And you're talking about the wiring running upside the outside of the superstructure. I kind of like to be able to see the wiring. We talked about channels in the time. It was a decision we were making in the moment. And at the end, we kind of like the way that the wiring is exposed and we can see it. And in fact, now we've already started adding to it and taking away from it. So it's been really nice. All right, Jessica asks, on average, how much does a boat such as Sea Venture cost? We're curious to know and would love to do this when we retire. So great question. I think the first question to answer is if you want to distinguish between coastal cruising boats and ocean-going power boats. There is a significant difference in those boats. So ocean-going power boats, there's only a few models around. New ones are Nordhavens and Selines, and Grand Banks with their brand new 60-foot just entered the market in a long-range ocean-going trawler. We happen to have some friends that are getting one of those. They're very expensive but beautiful. I think on the new side, those boats are anywhere from $3 million and up. In the used market, I think you can go from $1 million and up for a lot of ocean-going trawlers. Now, Sea Venture costs less than that, but we have several thousand hours of work bringing her up to where she is right now after many years, 40 years of cruising the world's oceans. So I think if you're willing to put in a lot of work and effort, you can go from about $500,000 and upwards for total investment of money and time to have a true ocean-going powerboat. Lars asks, what an impressive job. Just wondering why you didn't elect to have a hardtop made to replace the Bimini top over the upper deck. Well, Lars, we thought a lot about that. But as we were doing the refit and adding the superstructure, it was just going to be another big cost factor and then more design work. And if you watched our last video, you saw we actually changed the canvas out, added the solar panels. The hardtop rebuild is still something we're considering and looking at those options for. So stay tuned. The hardtop may be coming. It may not. We may decide to keep it the way it is. But for now, it's not there, but it may be.
Okay, Marcus asks, can your gearboxes handle a freewheeling prop if you cut back to just running one engine? Yes, they can, but it probably wouldn't be that terrific for it. And the props would create some drag in the water, which would also create challenges. Also, running one engine, you now have an offset engine, an offset prop, so your steering could be a little more challenging to keep your boat going the direction you want to go. I think that running on one engine is great for a get-home system if you have a problem with an engine or need to get home, but it would not be a method of conserving fuel or trying to get around economically or something. So.
From True Anomaly, you did not explain what those outside poles are used for. Well, those are the Paravane Stabilizers, and you can watch the refit series where we go all through having those systems designed and built to stabilize the boat at sea. But I do think in the future we need to do a tech talk video, one of those again, which have been surprisingly to me popular, about exactly the process of launching the Paravanes, retrieving the Paravanes, and the effect they have cruising. Hey, William asked, would you please share your engine room checklist so we may emulate your engine room program? Well, that's quite a compliment, and thank you, William. And yes, I'll post the engine room checklist, and if you want to email us at cruisingseaventure@gmail.com, I'm happy to email it to you. What William, if you don't know, is referring to is from our engine room tour, and maybe on some other videos it's in there shortly. We have a multi-point checklist printed out and on the wall in the engine room that we check every 2 hours or so when we're cruising. So happy to do so, William. Thanks for the question. All right, here's a question from ACLC Houston. How old or young is Sea Venture, and did you buy her new or used? Well, Sea Venture was built in 1977 by Cheoy Lee shipyards, and we bought her used, and we bought her in the spring of 2014.
All right, JC1028 asks, has Kitty ever taken an unexpected dip in the water? Well, for those of you who don't know him, Trooper was our cat who was in our earlier episodes, and he passed away in 2017. But he did take an unexpected dip in the water, but he took it off of the dock. He loved to jump off the boat and get onto the dock, and then he would like to roll around on the warm concrete docks. And I think one time he just rolled around one too many times and went right over the side. And fortunately we heard him and we were able to scoop him out of the water, and he beelined back home. But that was the only time. He never fell off the boat. And that was, he kept us wondering a lot of times because he'd like to sit on the railings, but no, he never fell in.
All right, a question from Super V8 Driver. How heavy is your boat, and how fast do you go when burning 3.15 gallons of diesel fuel per hour? Our boat is about 45 tons when loaded, and we go about 7 knots at 3.15 gallons per hour. You're talking about Sea Venture being in the Caribbean and in South America. When was Sea Venture in the Caribbean, and did you all own her at the time? A question from Jerome. Great question. We did not own her at the time. The prior owners of Sea Venture spent 10 years with no moorage cruising South America and the Caribbean and South Pacific. So she's actually spent about 3/4 of her life in the tropics, and only the last 10 years or so, 5 years under our ownership, in the Pacific Northwest.
From N330AA. If you go to Ecuador or somewhere with cheap fuel and load her up to the gills so you're like an oil tanker with a house on top, then decide you want to cruise to the US or Canada, do you have to pay duties when you arrive? No, you do not.
JJ asked, maybe you've already answered this question, but could you disclose, assuming the boat was paid for in cash, how much a person would need on a monthly basis to budget for a life like this? You can direct me to the proper video to watch if you've already covered this. Thanks. All right, JJ, great question. Where we talk about the cost of cruising is at the end of our Haida series. We did a video on the cost, and I think it was relatively cost effective when we're out cruising. The big factors are moorage, and for us in the United States, health insurance. After that, it just depends a lot of what you're cruising.
Jeep and Johnny asked, I didn't see any spare props. Well, that's because we forgot to show them to you. We do have 2 spare props. They are stainless steel props. They're stored in the floor in a hatch in the floor of our master's stateroom, along with all of our zincs. But yes, we do have them.
All right, question from Torque11. I think I'm saying that right. I'd be interested in knowing on average how often you refuel. Great question. Well, it depends on how much we go cruising. On average, we have refueled once a year. So you can watch the fuel management video. You'll see that Sea Venture holds 2,158 gallons of diesel. It gives us about a 4,300 nautical mile range. It's a long way. But generally, we have refueled once a year. Right, Marcus asked, how do you find maneuvering without a bow thruster? And is it okay with just the twin engines in windy conditions? And Marcus, yes, for the most part, it is just fine. You just have to learn how to do it. We have decided not to install a bow thruster on Sea Venture. She's never had one. There's some logistical problems in the front of our boat with doing it because of the ocean going. One of the items there is we have a collision bulkhead that would have to be penetrated to do it, and also bow thrusters because they put that hole through the front of the boat, slow the boat down, and a little bit of reduced speed makes a big difference when you're going thousands of miles. So no bow thruster, we just have to learn how to do it, and for the most part it's never really been an issue. Paul asked and said, excellent job, very clear and concise. Out of curiosity, I'm wondering if the gentleman was or is an engineer by profession. His charts and logs look sort of complicated. Well, Paul, I'll just take that as a compliment. Thank you. And no, I was not an engineer by profession. I actually had a really boring job for a long time for an insurance company, and that's it. Not nearly as much fun as boating. I just like the meticulousness of having to take care of everything and the challenge of taking care of everything, and try to appreciate the importance that it's my job or our job to make sure everything is taken care of, and that we're independent. And so just keeping track of everything in a lot of detail just helps us make sure that Sea Venture keeps running at optimum performance and that we're ready to deal with problems when they arise. So that's kind of the approach of why that we try to be as meticulous as we can. But thank you.
All right, John commented that he'd been binge watching our videos, and he says they're great with one exception, that annoying techno beat music. Yeah, I agree, actually. I think you're right. We've struggled with finding the right music that's copyright free, but we're working on it, and we're working on upgrading our software, and hopefully that will provide us some better options for music. But yeah, we agree. You're right on.
Bob asked, here said, this may seem like a strange question, but what cameras do you use? And do you know about image stabilization? Newer cameras have this feature built in if you want to look into it for your next camera. Thanks, Bob. We use primarily GoPro cameras because they're simple and small and they're fun, and they actually have a image stabilization in them, which we actually have on. But for Christmas this year, I got a handheld gyro unit for the GoPros. So watch that coming. Maybe they'll come out a little more stabilized. But that's it. We just use a couple GoPros. All right, here's a question from Arnie. Do you have any concerns about the age of the diesel when buying in such volume? And what is the longest you have had diesel stored in your tanks? It must be a long time between refills. Are you concerned about having nearly empty tanks for long periods? And how do you schedule tank inspections? Sorry for the 20 questions. I have a 32-year-old 20-meter wooden power cat and have cruised extensively in the South Pacific and Southeast Asia since 1995. Well, Arnie, thanks for watching. Several questions there, which are great questions. We have not had any issues with the diesel in our tanks. As I mentioned, I think answering another question, we on average buy fuel about once a year. I don't think the fuel when we bought it is really old because we're buying it in places that fill lots of large yachts and large fish boats that take on thousands and thousands of gallons. And I think the issue of empty tanks has not been much of a problem for us, but we do have the fiberglass tanks, and I think they don't develop the condensation problems. Inspections have indicated almost no water in the tanks or particulate or any problems with the tanks at all. And if you watch the fuel management video, I think is the best one to show. We do have 24-inch opening ports into the tanks for inspections and cleaning, so we're able to maintain the interior of the tanks as needed. But again, thanks for the question, and maybe one day we'll come find you in the South Pacific somewhere.
Helmsman says, hey, I've really enjoyed your videos. I've just retired and looking forward to finding my next boat for cruising the Northwest. Are we still planning on cruising down south? And yes, we are. We're still planning to head south fall of 2020.
Skeeter had a question. He said, in your numbers, you mentioned having 2 600-gallon water tanks. Why in the world would you want that much fresh water on a motor vessel? What's wrong with a 200-gallon tank and a water maker? Are the water tanks foam molded into the hull too? Fuel I understand, and I love the long-range tank arrangement, but some things like that much water storage seem like a space waste. Well, great questions. Yes, you got that right. We have 2 600-gallon water tanks, and on top of that, we also have a 300-gallon per day water maker. What I think is what I wouldn't like about having a 200-gallon water tank is that what's the backup plan if you're long-range cruising, if you have a water maker problem? And water makers are one of those items on boats that are notoriously problematic. So if we had only 200 gallons of fresh water, which by the way, at our usage is like 3 days worth, and yes, we could use less, but we choose not to. I think I would want 2 water makers on board. They're not foam molded into the hull. They are fiberglass tanks that are integral to the hull. And that may be kind of the same thing, but they're an important structural component to the hull and to the boat and to the stability of the boat. And because the outside of the hull is the outside of those tanks, and they're long and thin tanks, it's not like if you tried to remove one, of which you would then need to add structural components, you would actually gain as much space as you might think. So, yes, we carry 1,200 gallons of fresh water. We love it. Like having that is not only a backup, but it limits how much or how often we have to run the water maker, and just makes it so that, as Rosie likes to put, we're not camping when we're boating. So we use fresh water freely and have fun doing so. Johnny wrote, just discovered your channel. I've subscribed for sure. What a great tour of the engine room. Thank you. I'm looking at a Marine Trader 43 that claims to have small pinholes in the fuel tanks. If I remember it, they're aluminum tanks. If they had to be replaced, I would think that would be a Herculean job to replace or to reseal them, and a lot of money. Do you have any opinion on this? Well, Marine Trader 43 is probably an excellent boat, a coastal cruising boat. And I think a lot of the older boats, the fuel tanks can be a real challenge, whether they're steel or aluminum. If they've been replaced, they're probably going to be replaced with stainless steel. I think some of those boats, it is a Herculean effort to replace tanks because of access. That's one of the things we liked about Sea Venture. If you watch the fuel management video, we talk about our fuel tanks in there. They are fiberglass tanks that are integral to the hull. That means Sea Venture's hull on the outside is the outside of the tanks, and the tanks themselves create part of the structure and stability of the boat itself. So we don't have that issue. But I think that's something you'd have to seriously look at if you were looking at a boat with a marine surveyor, if there were potential problems with the tanks. All right, here's a long question from Todd, but it's perfect because it leads right into a project we're just getting ready to start on the boat. Todd wrote, a lot of motor yachts have generators, and I'm assuming that, for instance, if someone wanted to nuke a microwavable burrito, that means firing up the generator. Yes, there are electrical needs on board that are going to require generator use, but on some of these new yachts, like for instance Nordhavens, they have generators on board, but they also have large sets of beefy house batteries, loads of them wired to inverter, and in some cases more than one and stacked. If your engines provide alternator charging for the house batteries, which then power the inverter, I'd love to know what systems or electrical needs on a boat can be powered via a DC inverter system so as to avoid regular continual generator use. Lots of variables obviously, but when I saw some reviews of boats online and saw that new production boats had only nice multi-kilowatt generators on board, but really beefy inverter systems back up with huge battery banks with hundreds of usable amps, I thought, why the need for both? And if you use your generator a lot, you're cutting out total boat range because of fuel usage. I have a lot to learn, love the videos. So thanks, Todd. Long question, but plays right into what we're in the middle of doing. Sea Venture has a 16 kilowatt Northern Lights generator, a very large generator. We also have 1,600 amp hours of house batteries. Those are wet cell batteries. So effective use is about 50% or 800 amp hours. And we currently have a 3,000 watt inverter that does power the microwave and all that stuff. The reason you would have a generator and alternators is that alternators charge while you're cruising, generators charge when you're at anchor for multiple days at a time. Most boats require several hours of generator use a day to keep the house batteries going. We are just in the process, as I mentioned in our last video, getting ready to do a significant change where we're changing out our alternators, computer that controls those to maximize their effort, installing lithium batteries, which are totally different power usage and ability to use, and 2 inverters so that we can run 100% of the boat systems, both 12 volt, 110 volt, and 220 volt off batteries. And so more of that to come, but great question. So Elmer Express asked, or said, I appreciate your videos. One thing I wondered about is you didn't mention your IR infrared night vision system. I assume it's integrated with one of your navigation setups. Would you mind explaining it when convenient? Yes, we do have a FLIR thermal imaging camera versus a night vision camera that uses light. A thermal imaging camera uses temperature variance. It's the exact same as like a police departments use on their helicopters and that kind of thing. We have it mounted on the bow. We do see the image on our main computer screen in the pilot house when cruising at night. It's got some really good strengths. In the right conditions, we can see a seagull at a half mile, and you can see logs and crab pots and anything that's in the water. We'll have a slight temperature variance, and you can see it. It has some significant limitations, though. So if you're thinking about installing one, I would email us at cruisingseaventure@gmail.com, and I can go more into that. But basically, in heavy seas and rain and fog, they become ineffective. So they're really a mixed bag, and I'm not totally sold on them yet. But we do like it. But thank you for the question.
Stop that. Okay. All right. Bob writes, just finished all of your refit and engine room fuel videos. Sailor turned RVer, now thinking about a possible trawler in the not too distant future and gathering some information. Wonder how it would be offshore with a shallow bottom boat like a trawler in heavy seas and high winds. I guess the Paravane would work better than a stabilizer system, but the forces must be tremendous on a boat that size and weight. Like the fact that you have that kind of range. What is your bridge clearance now? Pretty cool. You give your costs. Fully appreciate that. Fair winds. Thanks, Bob.
Cool. Well, it's like 6 questions in one, which is like very effective, I suppose, or efficient.
Yes.
You ask about offshore with a shallow bottom boat like a trawler in heavy seas and high winds. I'm not sure what you're meaning quite by that. So Sea Venture draws about 6.5 feet. I don't think you would normally consider that a shallow bottom boat for a 54-foot boat. But if you're interested in ocean-going power boats versus coastal cruisers and all the parameters associated with that, which actually fuel range is one of the simple and very few parameters required for an ocean-going power boat. I don't know what to do except refer people to the book Voyaging Under Power, which is like the Bible of ocean-going power boats. It's had multiple editions, first written by Robert Beebe. And Sea Venture meets all the parameters that's detailed in that book. If you go to the 4th edition of that book, there's photographs and referencing a boat by the name of Chartwell. Chartwell is Sea Venture's sister ship. So that can tell you more about Sea Venture and Cheoy Lee when they were building these boats. They said, I guess the Paravane system would work better than a stabilizer system, but the forces must be tremendous.
Well, the Paravanes are a stabilizer system, and the forces are indeed tremendous on the Paravanes when they're deployed. I think we talked about 10,000 pounds.
Yeah, they're rated to hold about 10,000 pounds on and off every 3 seconds. If you want to give that some type of something to compare
context.
to, that's the same as hanging 2 automobiles from each pole. Is the force on that system,
which is why we required a naval architect to design and engineer the whole Paravane system.
There's a lot of engineering.
We did go thoroughly through the process to get it done right. So, and what's our bridge clearance now? 37 feet.
Yep, with the poles up, 37 feet is the bridge clearance for the boat.
I think that's it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for watching this Q&A and letting us get away with answering the questions in a video versus typing them all out to individuals.
Yes.
I think this might be pretty effective, though. So if you want, stick a comment in there if you think with every time we do a video, should we take the 4 or 5 or 6 questions that have been asked since the last video and answer them at the end of each video. I think we did that once a long time ago, a little bit, but that might, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud that might be nicer for people and a little better format than just typing out individual answers that go to people. So,
Well, then you can see what other people are curious about,
Yeah.
and maybe learn something you didn't even know you wanted to ask.
how about that? So anyway, give us your thoughts about that in the comments, or you can always email us at cruisingseaventure@gmail.com. And now our next video, back to Alaska. Is that
I
right?
think so.
Our next video after this one should be continuing our Alaska cruise series, and I think the very next video will have a lot of our interaction with grizzlies, with grizzly bears, and so hopefully that will be done soon. So for now, thank you very much, and wishing you no wind and flat seas.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.